"This is filthy! Are you blind?" Amanda, the janitorial supervisor, shouted aggressively at Amina, the new black janitor. Her voice echoed in the pristine office, cutting through the calm air of the executive floor. Amina, mop in hand, glanced down at the polished glass table. "I just cleaned it," she said without hesitation. Amanda didn't even pause. She picked up a full cup of coffee and hurled it across the table. The dark liquid splattered across the glass, dripping onto the floor. Amanda crossed her arms, glaring at Amina with disdain. "Now clean it again. If you believe everyone should be treated equally, no matter their color or background, you're in the right place. Click the subscribe button now and let us know where you're watching from. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless." Amina James stood tall, her athletic build a silent reminder of her strength. At 30 years old, her appearance was calm and composed, even in the most uncomfortable situations. Her short, curly hair framed her face, emphasizing her sharp, intelligent eyes. Her features, like her presence, were commanding yet subtle. Dressed in the janitor's uniform, blue overalls and sturdy shoes, she was a stark contrast to the sleek suits of the corporate world around her. To the employees at Benson Tech Innovations, she was just another face among the workers they often overlooked. But Amina was far more than that. Amina was the daughter of Charles James, the powerful and wealthy founder of the company. The heir to Benson Tech Innovations, a multi-billion-dollar technology empire, she had been groomed for success. After years of studying abroad and working in various industries, she returned to the company, eager to see firsthand what kind of culture it fostered. What she had heard about the company's treatment of employees, especially minorities, had unsettled her. Rumors swirled about discriminatory practices, unspoken hierarchies, and opportunities denied based on race. Determined to understand if these rumors were true, Amina had decided to go undercover, assuming the role of a janitor. She would experience the company's culture from the ground up, without anyone knowing who she really was. She wanted to see the company's treatment of its employees, to test the systems in place, and to learn if the whispers of bias were genuine. She wasn't just here to observe. She was here to uncover the truth. Her calm, almost serene exterior often made others underestimate her. But beneath her composed demeanor, Amina had the same fire in her heart that had driven her father's success. She wouldn't back down, not now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. Harper Banks. Harper Banks was a woman who thrived on control. In her mid-40s, Harper had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer grit and unrelenting ambition. Her sharp features, high cheekbones and a pointed nose, were accentuated by her severe blonde bun and perfectly tailored business attire. She held herself with the kind of authority that was almost palpable, her posture rigid and unwavering, as if no one could stand in her way. She wasn't just a supervisor. She was the gatekeeper to the corporate world Amina had entered. Having worked at Benson Tech Innovations for over 20 years, Harper believed in the company's hierarchy, its rules, and its standards. To her, the corporate world was a place where only the fittest survived. She adhered to what she called the old guard mentality, the belief that people should earn their place, that success was a matter of merit, and that everyone else was expendable. She had little patience for anyone who didn't fit her vision of professionalism and discipline. Harper's past was one of hard work and calculated moves. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege, so she made her own way, clawing up from an entry-level job to her current position of authority. Her success had been hard-earned, but it had also fostered a belief that she was above others, that her journey was the right one. She had little respect for those who didn't follow her path, and even less for those who were beneath her, like the janitors she oversaw. Her belief in hierarchy went beyond the company. It was a worldview, one that ranked people based on their status, their attire, and their role in the company. To Harper, anyone who was not in a suit and tie, who didn't hold a high-pay position, was someone to look down on. And Amina, in her janitorial uniform, was just another cog in the wheel. A person who existed to serve, not to question the established order. Harper's sense of superiority made her dismissive, and she never hesitated to make others feel small if it reinforced her own sense of power. But what Harper didn't know, what no one in the company knew, was that Amina was much more than the nobody they believed her to be. The day Harper scolded her for a spilled cup of coffee would be the day her world, and the world of everyone who had underestimated Amina, would begin to unravel. In this setup, we begin to see the deep contrasts between Amina and Harper, two individuals from very different walks of life, brought together in a moment of conflict. Amina's quiet resilience, hidden behind the janitor's uniform, meets Harper's blatant authority and judgment. These layers of character depth not only reveal their motivations, but also set the stage for a confrontation that will change everything. The audience is primed for the building tension, as they see just how deeply the characters are embedded in their own beliefs, unaware of the truth that is about to unfold. Amina's first day at Benson Tech Innovations felt like stepping into a world where she didn't belong. The moment she walked through the revolving doors, the polished floors, and gleaming glass walls greeted her like a stranger in a house that didn't welcome her. Every step she took echoed with the weight of what she was doing. Benson Tech was the pinnacle of corporate success. And yet, on her first day, Amina James, the heir to the company, daughter of its billionaire CEO, was just another nameless janitor, hidden behind the drab blue uniform and scrub brush. Amina had come in disguise, intent on learning the true inner workings of her father's empire. The rumors about racial bias, the whispers of opportunities reserved only for a select few, and the subtle segregation of roles had all haunted her ears. She wanted to know if the stories were true, if employees were really treated based on their skin color, their social standing, or if it was just a collection of bad gossip. But on her first day, it was clear that some of these whispers weren't rumors at all. As Amina moved through the office, she felt the eyes on her, those curious glances and dismissive stares. She had expected it, but the sting was still there. People passed her by without acknowledging her, as if she were invisible. When they did glance her way, it was filled with confusion. Amina, who had once walked confidently through every boardroom and office of Benson Tech, now found herself a silent observer of the world she was about to infiltrate. She could feel their eyes sizing her up, a janitor in a corporate world, as if they couldn't fathom why she would be here. The microaggressions were immediate. Amina was ignored at the reception desk, while a dozen other employees, dressed in tailored suits, were greeted with smiles and respectful nods. No one offered to help her with anything, and no one even bothered to acknowledge her presence. A woman in the elevator shot her a quick glance, then quickly averted her eyes as though uncomfortable. Whispers rippled around her as she walked the halls, her uniform setting her apart from the sharp suits that defined the company's image. It wasn't blatant, but the subtle rejection was there, hanging in the air like a cloud, making her feel as if she were somehow beneath them. She'd always known that she had a different kind of power, the ability to blend in when needed, the quiet strength that people often underestimated. But the fact that people here saw her as nothing more than a cleaning lady felt like a punch to the gut. She pushed those thoughts aside. She was here to learn, to see for herself the biases that had long been rumored. She would be patient. But as she walked deeper into the building, she could feel the weight of the challenge settling in. This wasn't going to be easy. It didn't take long for Harper Banks, the janitorial supervisor, to take notice of Amina. From the moment their eyes met, Harper's attitude was unmistakable. There was no attempt to disguise her disdain. Harper, in her late 40s, with her sharp features and severe blonde bun, was a product of the corporate system, and she believed in it wholeheartedly. To her, Benson Tech was a place of order, of rules that needed to be followed, and employees who needed to be kept in line, and prided herself on enforcing the company's hierarchy, on making sure that everyone knew their place. And she made it clear right away that Amina's place was at the bottom. The verbal abuse started almost immediately. Amina had been given the task of cleaning the executive lounge, a task that was typically the responsibility of the highest-ranking staff on the janitorial team. But Amina did it without question. As she carefully wiped down the surfaces, Harper stood over her, arms crossed, watching her every move. "That's not good enough," Harper barked, pointing at a streak of dust on the glass table. "Didn't you see that? This place needs to shine, not look like a child did it. Are you even paying attention?" Amina didn't respond. She merely took a breath and wiped the surface again. But it wasn't enough for Harper. The tirade continued. You can't even mop a floor right. Is this really the best you've got? This is the executive floor, not the storage room." There was no patience in Harper's voice, no understanding that mistakes happen. It wasn't about the cleaning, it was about control. Amina realized that quickly. Harper was making a point to degrade her, to show her who had the power. Amina simply nodded and got back to work. But inside, the fury was building. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't just the cleaning mistakes Harper picked on. It was everything, every word. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't just the cleaning mistakes Harper picked on. It was everything. Every word Amina said seemed to spark Harper's ire. When Amina asked for clarification on the company's cleaning supplies, Harper snapped back, "Do I look like your personal assistant?" Even when she made no mistakes, it was as if Harper was looking for reasons to tear her down. The more Harper berated her, the more Amina realized that this was more than just a supervisor's authority. It was personal. Harper wasn't just irritated by Amina's presence. She seemed to resent her, and that made Amina more determined to continue her mission. If Harper was the face of authority, Kevin Daniels was the voice of open hostility. A senior operations manager at Benson Tech, Kevin had long since passed the point where he needed to prove himself. He was privileged, secure, in his high-ranking position and the social capital that came with it. And he had no patience for people like Amina, who, to him, didn't belong in the world of corporate power. From the very first day, Kevin had made it clear that he didn't think Amina belonged here. He would walk past her in the hallways, often dropping, "Shouldn't you be cleaning up that mess?" Or, "What are you doing out here, cleaning the floor like you're in the wrong building?" His comments weren't subtle. He was blunt, condescending, and open in his disregard for her. As the days wore on, his behavior became even more overt. He would intentionally spill coffee near Amina, watching with a smirk as she dutifully cleaned it up. He mocked her appearance, pointing out that she didn't fit in with the rest of the company. "Maybe you should wear a suit next time," he'd say. "Or are you too busy mopping up messes to care about how you look?" Amina never rose to the bait. She took note of every word, every act of disrespect, but she said nothing in return. She knew better than to escalate things. Kevin didn't know who she really was, and as long as he continued to underestimate her, she had the upper hand. Still, the tension was building inside her. Kevin's actions weren't just rude, they were a blatant challenge. He was testing her, trying to push her to react, to show some vulnerability. But Amina wasn't ready to reveal her true identity. Not yet. The tension between Amina and the employees of Benson Tech Innovations continued to grow, day by day. Every action Amina took seemed to provoke a reaction from those around her, whether it was Harper's constant scrutiny or Kevin's cruel taunts. And as she worked, cleaning every corner of the office, she observed more than she let on. She wasn't just taking notes on her cleaning tasks. She was studying the company's employees, their behavior, their attitudes, their prejudices. She had learned long ago that people didn't always show their true selves, but if you watched long enough, the cracks would appear. The question wasn't whether Amina could handle the mistreatment. She could. The question was, how much longer would the company continue to overlook her? How much longer before she revealed herself as the person who would change everything? And when she did, everyone in that building, the ones who had ignored her, belittled her, and ridiculed her, would realize they had been underestimating her the entire time. In this extended version, Amina's conflict with Harper and Kevin intensifies. They target her at every turn, but Amina's patience and calm demeanor only serve to build the tension even further. The subtle and overt racism she faces is a constant reminder of the stakes, and her growing resolve shows that something bigger is on the horizon. The tension in the meeting room was thick, almost suffocating. Amina had been enduring the daily humiliation from Harper and Kevin for days, but today something had changed. Today, she would make them all see the truth. It began like any other staff meeting, with Harper in full control, standing at the front of the room with her cold, commanding posture. The employees had settled in, all eyes on her as she barked out the usual orders. Kevin, sitting to the side, crossed his arms, exuding the kind of smug confidence that came with years of corporate privilege. The rest of the staff quietly listened. their eyes occasionally darting toward Amina, who stood silently at the back of the room, a silent observer in her janitor's uniform. It was business as usual for them, but not for Amina. Harper's eyes flicked over to Amina, who stood motionless in the back corner of the room. The supervisor, ever keen to assert her dominance, couldn't resist one last chance to publicly humiliate her. "You think you're here to do a job?" Harper sneered, her voice laced with venom. "This is the executive floor, not some corner for cleaning supplies. If you're going to be here, at least do something useful." Amina didn't flinch, didn't react. Her eyes focused on Harper as if she had already anticipated the cruelty. She had been studying Harper's every word, every action, noting the contempt in her voice. It was a moment she had prepared for, the kind of abuse she had expected from someone like Harper, who held all the power in this building, or so she thought. In one swift motion, Harper grabbed her coffee cup and threw it across the table, the dark liquid splattering across the surface and dripping onto the floor. A gasp rippled through the room, the sound of coffee hitting the polished floor echoing through the silent air. "Clean it up," Harper commanded, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms, expecting the usual subservience. Now, the tension was suffocating. Employees looked on, frozen, unsure of how this would unfold. Amina's hands gripped the mop tighter, the room heavy with the weight of the moment. It was a calculated move. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to fight. Not yet. She was here for something bigger. But Harper wasn't finished. "I'm done with you," she snarled, her voice dripping with disdain. "If you think you can come into this company, acting like you own the place, I'm going to make sure everyone knows you're a nobody. I'll have you fired for disrespect." Amina took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Harper. The room grew colder. Her father's empire was nothing like the playground that these executives believed it to be. She wasn't about to let them tear her down in front of everyone. Not when she had been quietly observing them, learning their flaws and waiting for the right moment. But before she could say another word, the tension in the room shifted. The receptionist's phone rang sharply, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife. The receptionist picked up the phone, her voice professional as she greeted the caller. But as the conversation continued, her expression changed. The phone slipped from her hand and her eyes widened in disbelief. She shot a quick glance toward the door, then back to the phone, as though confirming something she had never expected to hear. The name Charles James, the CEO of Benson Tech Innovations, was spoken clearly into the room. Suddenly, every head in the room turned. The room fell into an eerie silence as the name Charles James lingered in the air. Employees straightened their ties and adjusted their suits, suddenly aware of the weight of his presence, even though he hadn't yet arrived. It was like a shift in the room, a seismic tremor that made everyone pause. The atmosphere that had been filled with tension now seemed to crackle with nervous energy. Harper's gaze darted around, her usual confidence faltering. She quickly straightened up, looking to Kevin for reassurance. Kevin, ever eager to impress, adjusted his shirt, smoothing out the wrinkles as if he were preparing for a personal audience with the CEO. They both assumed one thing, that the CEO, a man they had worked with for years, would back them up. After all, Charles James was the one who had built Benson Tech into the empire it had become. He was the one they all respected, feared even, and surely he would understand the corporate hierarchy that they had carefully nurtured. But they had no idea just how wrong they were. The elevator doors dinged, and the hushed whispers in the room stopped in an instant. Charles James stepped into the room, his tall figure cutting through the silence like a shadow. His presence was commanding, his face shut. The elevator doors dinged, and the hushed whispers in the room stopped in an instant. Charles James stepped into the room, his tall figure cutting through the silence like a shadow. His presence was commanding, his face sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. A veteran of the corporate world, his mere appearance in the room made everyone straighten up, instinctively aware that something was about to change. The staff, Harper included, waited for him to acknowledge them. They had expected him to greet them with the same cold, business-like politeness he'd shown so many times before. But as Charles James walked across the room, his eyes never once fell on Harper or Kevin. They were invisible in his presence. His gaze, however, was fixed on Amina. The room held its breath. Then, without hesitation, Amina James stepped forward. Her gaze was calm, collected, and she spoke with the authority of someone who had been born into power, someone who had already earned it. "I'm sorry for the delay," Amina said, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "I'm Amina James, the new CEO of Benson Tech Innovations." The room froze. The world outside the walls of Benson Tech may have been a place where secrets were easily hidden, but inside these walls, the truth was like a bomb, waiting to explode. Amina James, the woman who had been mocked, belittled, and humiliated by Harper and Kevin, wasn't just a janitor. She was the heir to the empire they had built their lives around. The silence was deafening. Harper's face drained of color, her mouth slightly agape, unable to process what was happening. Kevin, always so confident in his own standing, now stood there, his arrogant grin wiped from his face. His entire world tilted on its axis. Amina stood tall, her posture unwavering, her eyes locked on the room. The people who had judged her, the ones who thought she was nothing, were now forced to face the truth that they had been unknowingly disrespecting the very person who had the power to undo everything they had worked so hard to protect. Charles James, her father, stood quietly behind her, a slight smile on his face as he observed the scene unfolding in front of him. He had watched his daughter grow, her strength hidden under the guise of the janitor's uniform, and now it was clear to everyone that Amina James had been in control the entire time. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation as Amina stepped forward, her voice steady and filled with authority. She faced Kevin and Harper, the two people who had mistreated her throughout her undercover mission, and now the truth was finally out. "Kevin Daniels," Amina began, her words cutting through the tense silence, "you're fired. Your actions have no place in this company." The confidence that Kevin once carried so effortlessly melted away as his face drained of color. He stammered, but couldn't form a coherent sentence. Without another word, he was escorted out of the room, his posture broken and his arrogant smirk replaced by humiliation. Turning to Harper, Amina continued, "Harper Banks, you're fired as well. Your treatment of others is unacceptable, and I won't allow it to continue under my leadership." Harper opened her mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She stood frozen, her hands shaking, as the realization hit her that the power she had once wielded so easily was gone. As security escorted Harper out, she walked past the stunned employees, her face pale, knowing her reign of cruelty had ended. As Kevin and Harper were escorted from the building, the room shifted. The employees, who had once feared or respected them, now watched in a mixture of shock and disbelief. Kevin, once the embodiment of corporate arrogance, now looked small and defeated. His head hung low as he left, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Harper, who had thought she was untouchable, now shuffled out, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and the room felt the weight of that change. Amina, the woman they had mistreated, was now their leader. With Harper and Kevin gone, and the culture of mistreatment shattered, Amina stood before the remaining employees, her voice steady as she delivered her final message. Amina's voice softened as she spoke her final words. "Racism thrives in silence, but standing up for justice makes a real difference. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than." The employees, once divided by power and privilege, were now united by a new sense of understanding. Amina had not only changed the company's culture, she had sparked a movement for respect, equality, and the kind of leadership that would guide Benson Tech into a new era. What would you have done if you were in Amina's shoes? How would you handle an office full of people who underestimate you because of your appearance? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice